when you get really into like more of the intricacies of Mario 64's movement system, it's not necessarily that like those things are bad. It's just that modern games didn't follow some of the same rules.
The movement from point A to point B, you're not even thinking about actual like platforming or having to get up higher or anything like that. Just the straight line already feels so good and gives you so many options. You can throw in some long jumps, the add-ins, those like extra height with the triple jumps.
What's your favorite game? Come on the show, let me pick your brain. We've all got favorite games. No takes too insane here on Your Fave Game.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Josh Busker, and welcome to another episode of Your Fave Game, the online talk show where we talk to some of the most creative people from across the internet and ask them the world's most important question: what's your favorite game? Today we are joined by none other than my fellow YouTube creator Wizawat, an incredibly talented video essayist and a master of talking about video game design. How are you doing today, Wiz?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Great intro.
No problem. Thank you very much. I'm getting better at them as I go along.
Felt well rehearsed there.
I don't know what order the episodes are going to go up in, but hopefully there'll be a nice little progression for the viewers as we go along. Yeah, we had a couple tech issues just with today, so we're probably doing both of us audio only. If I'm on screen, then I got the video working on my end, but if not, then you'll have our lovely little PNG tubers to deal with.
Yeah, would have loved to show my face, but you know, tech issues, they come up, so we're rolling with it.
Next time we'll have the beautiful face reveal. So I think we're just gonna hop right into it. Wiz, you're on the show here today. So please tell us, what is your favorite game?
Well, that's a good question. I think
Thank you.
for me, I think it's an interesting question, particularly because historically for me, it's been like there's been a shifting answer. And growing up, like I had certain opinions, and that they've obviously changed over time. And when you asked me to come on, I was thinking like there were a few games that I was considering what I felt was like the most representative of, especially of how I'm feeling with gaming like right now. And among all of them, there was just one that felt like a cliche answer to a lot of people, but I just, for as far as like what specifically appeals to me and what I'm looking to see in gaming right now, there was only one answer, and that is Super Mario 64.
Yes, a classic. Very much a classic. Some of these starting episodes have been on like really kind of big games, I guess in quotation marks, the obvious answers for like what someone's favorite game is. But I think it's important to kind of point out that one, there's a reason that these games are so popular and are such popular answers among people, but also that our connections to these games can still be really personal, even if a lot of other people would also say that it's one of their favorite games or one of the best games or impacted them the most. So I don't think that detracts from it at all, really.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like, I think what's really interesting about my relationship with this game is that it's very, you know, Super Mario 64 and games specifically from that era, at least probably for like people within our age group, I would be assuming. That was like what we grew up with. That was definitely what I grew up with. And so there's a lot of nostalgic ties to games from that era. But I actually don't really have many nostalgic ties to Super Mario 64 specifically. And it's a game that has like really grown on me over time, even in spite of people, you know, I think like detractors kind of say like, oh yeah, Super Mario 64, they'll concede like this was a super important game, but it hasn't aged well over time. I actually would disagree. And I would say that compared to maybe some other popular games, I think it's aged like fine wine. And I'm really excited to talk about why I feel that way.
It's really interesting because actually just today, I think there's some Twitter discourse going around of people arguing back and forth whether Mario 64 or Sonic Adventure has aged better or worse. And I was
think
like,
I saw some Sonic discourse regarding
yeah,
Adventure.
I think that's been bubbling up, and It's kind of fascinating that we keep kind of circling around to the same kind of discussions in the Mario and Sonic fan communities.
Yeah.
I actually find myself often on the you can't discount Mario 64 because it's just so important. Like that's usually where I
Mhm.
stand in the argument. But I would fully agree that I don't feel that that game has aged all that much because whenever I go back to play it, it's just immediately locks in. Everything feels like perfect. Like they released it yesterday.
Yeah. I agree completely. I don't know if I would say, like, it feels like they released it just yesterday. I
Yeah,
think that,
might be a little
like
far. Yeah.
yeah, but I understand the sentiment. I think
hmm
that, you know, people will point to its negatives and say, like, "Well, yeah, like, this hasn't aged well." You can clearly see by, like, what is, like, like, modern sensibilities across a wide variety of, like, especially, like, 3D platforming games, like, they'll
hmm
point to the camera, say, like, "The camera is, like, not good." They'll point to some of the, like, movement physics and say, like we can definitely get into it in more detail, but, like, as an example, like, that weird, like, half circle turn that Mario does when he's, like, trying to turn around as opposed to, like, more the snappy, like, quick turns in some of the other
hmm
Mario games. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
like, specifically, like, Sunshine. They'll point to stuff like that, and I kinda feel like there's a point to be made there, but also when you get really into, like, more of the intricacies of Mario 64's movement system, it's not necessarily that, like, those things are bad, it's just that modern games didn't follow some of the same rules that it set out to, like, accomplish with its design, and so
hmm
it's just unpredictable to go back to a game like that and see the things that didn't carry over into other games. Because I actually think that some of the things that people don't like actually add to my enjoyment of the game and, like, how precise it can be to control when it doesn't always come across that way.
Yeah, I think Mario 64 is in a really interesting spot because there really wasn't any other game. Well, there was very few 3D games that it could kind of learn from, but there was like all I don't know if there was any like games that used an analog stick that they could even like base any of their design ideas off of. Like they were inventing so much of that just themselves. And so yeah, it is really interesting that some of the decisions it made have just caught on as like the default for 3D action games or 3D platformers in general. And then other directions, like sequels like Mario Sunshine or even other 3D platformer follow ups from other companies, just veered in a different direction. And that kind of became the default, how we get used to 3D movement in these games.
That kinda just, like, opens up, like, the whole conversation, so I like, there's so many different directions that I could go in that I'm kinda curious where you would like to start, kinda.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of possibilities. So actually, because I do find it interesting because I just said that to me, Mario 64, like I don't think it feels that dated at all. But a lot of the times, whenever I tell that to people, I sort of give the justification or I kind of caveat it with, well, I've been playing this game since I was like 6 years old or since I was very young. So I've just ingrained all of its little like quirks and things like that, and so I almost kind of say that I can't properly like gauge how it's aged because I'm biased because I've like been playing it from the beginning and just all those little quirks are kind of stuck in my ways with that. So it's actually kind of reassuring to hear you say that you don't have a lot of nostalgia for the game. You didn't play it a whole lot growing up, but it still has one of your favorite movement systems and that there's something special and good specifically about how it does movement that's not just, oh, I'm used to it. Like I'm used to this old beat up truck and how it controls. Like, no, there's actually
Mhm.
something special about the way that it controls.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and I can kinda explain why I feel that way. Um,
Yeah, let's go in as deep as you want to get with the movement or the physics or anything like that.
sure, yeah. I'll start briefly. I kinda wanna explain, like, what brought me to the game in the way in, like, the state that I, like, approach it now. Like I said, like, us being kinda in the similar age group where we grew up with the N64. For me, like, Mario 64 was always there, but it never, like, commanded my attention. I was always Like for me, the game that like defined that era of my childhood was actually Donkey Kong 64, which is like,
Oh, that's a
you
good
know,
one.
I feel like kind of conflicted about it nowadays. Like I still love it, like it's still very nostalgic about it. But
Mhm.
Mario 64 clearly, especially when you're like looking at movement, scratches like a different itch. To me, like Donkey Kong 64 is like, especially with the collection aspects and the exploration, this is going to sound really bad, but it almost feels like I would describe it as kind of junk food in terms of
Mhm.
like the things that I really value in platforming right now. What games like that were really good at, especially, I think about like Banjo-Kazooie as well. It just like the way that these collectible things were scattered around, they like ferried you, shepherd you along this world to take a tour of these worlds that really were very imaginative for the time. And so
Mhm. Yeah.
that's what I was like super interested in as a kid. It makes sense. Like it really plays into like the whole childlike wonder thing. And in that like early 3D era, it was very easy to feel like really immersed in those worlds, I think.
Yes, yeah. Like there's a huge kind of difference between like a Mario 64 level, which it has like some theming, like you get into the desert level or things like that, and there's kind of some specific landmarks, like there's the boss inside the pyramid and everything. But in comparison to some of the more detailed levels from Donkey Kong 64, or what's coming to mind for me immediately is like Banjo-Tooie,
Mhm.
like the circus levels and things like that, where every jiggy is kind of tied to like a little character storyline and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of direction, and yeah, for a kid it feels a whole lot more like, oh, I'm going on this adventure through this world and all these characters that keep popping up.
Mhm.
Is very different from kind of the obstacle course mentality that I feel like Mario had.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree completely. And like you really see that obstacle course kind of thing in like some of those weirder levels that feel like kind of just an amalgamation of like weird level geometry to see like what Mario can interact with and how like weird objects like changes like what he can do. I think
Hmm.
to me I think of like Lethal Lava Land and probably like Rainbow Ride especially. Oh my god, that is a mess of just like all these like different pathways with stuff, just not a lot of context to
Yeah.
a lot of
The,
the
what
obstacles and stuff there.
what platforms haven't we used yet in this game?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For me, I think it wasn't really until Mario Odyssey came out when I started to really think about what I found like really interesting in a platforming game, because like after the N64 era, like I played Sunshine and I liked it a lot, but I didn't really think deeply about why it appealed to me. The Galaxy games came and went, and they didn't really stick with me like to the same degree as anything else from that era particularly, and I didn't know
Mm,
why. And then Odyssey came along and I was like, "Oh my god, like this is like next level." And it was clearly because of the movement and the way that the level design, well, definitely not to the same extent as like Super Mario 64, as focused or as tight, like because it was trying to be something a little bit more ambitious and immersive at the same time. You had these like open zone things. Like I think when Sonic Frontiers came out, that open zone term was kind of like brought into the discourse kind of by the creator. I would say it's kind of a in between like a regular level and a complete open world. You have like the open zone. It's like that middle ground.
yeah.
And the way Mario just moved in those, like you have certain platforming gauntlet kind of things like scattered throughout those levels, like, and you have just the like the tightness, and also when you the big difference maker that which really made it click in my head was when you would go a little bit like off the beaten path and try to like climb or navigate your way to some certain point that didn't feel developer intended, and there would just be a pile of coins there and be like, okay, like this
Oh,
is
they did want me
possible.
going here.
Yeah, they clearly tried this, and while it's not a main feature of the level design, like, I'm being rewarded for it, which clearly means, like, the developers want me to explore the absolute limits of what Mario can do. And so, after that experience, I went back to Super Mario 64 in 2020. It was, like, the middle of the pandemic, and I just kinda got into, like, early, like, speed running of Super Mario 64. My brother was getting into it. We were watching a lot of Twitch at the time, and one of our favorite streamers, Clint Stevens, I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so he was doing a lot of Ocarina of Time speedrunning. He shifted over to Mario 64, and that kinda opened up my mind to the possibilities of, like, what you can actually do in the game, and I started playing it and learning kind of like the basic like 16 star route, which is probably I would say one of the most like beginner friendly speed runs, at least for people that are skilled in platformers. Like I think if you're interested in speed running a platforming game, try to learn a 16 star speed run. It's like the best way to get into it.
Yeah, that 2020, I think that was around the era, right around the start of the pandemic, was there was kind of a trend on Twitch that even a lot of the non-speedrunner streamers were just randomly speedrunning Mario 64 for a bit. Just
Yes.
not even going for the records, but just seeing like their own personal time or their time like against their other streamer buddies. I remember that was
Mhm.
like a really cool Twitch era where just everyone was kind of going for the different Mario 64 categories, but nowhere near close like the best times, but just
Yeah.
for the fun of it and like kind of personal competition.
It's weirdly accessible, strangely accessible for speedrunning, and I think that kind of made me realize, like, what Super Mario 64 did in movement, and particularly in movement expression with, like, its level design, but also having a bunch of different routes that you can navigate to get to certain objectives. I was like, "There's something more to this than simply going to a place, collecting a few things, like interacting with a context sensitive thing like in Banjo-Kazooie, and then you get a reward for it.
Hmm.
Like Mario 64 doesn't really do that sort of thing, but it's like still like stupid fun like all the time, like especially when you're it for me one of the like benchmarks maybe is like when you're just moving around uh f- in a straight line even just from point A to point B, what can you do with the movement system that makes the game fun? And in Mario, like you have a bunch of options. Like you can as you're practicing like learning how to jump, you can do triple jumps, and that is just fun on its own to like be rewarded for your sequential timing with a triple jump. But also like, even more impactfully, one of my favorite things to do in Mario is just run around and just dive and roll out of it over and over again.
Yes, and like just that alone feels so just mechanically satisfying, and just like if you catch a little bit of slope with the slide, you gain so much extra speed, and just the movement from point A to point B, you're not even thinking about actual like platforming or having to get up higher or anything like that. Just the straight line already feels so good and gives you so many options. You can throw in some long jumps to add in those like extra height with the triple jumps. Yeah, it just phenomenal amount of choice.
Yeah, yeah. There's like always something that you can be doing. And, I think like not to like drag down this other game like throughout this whole thing, but I think back to like Donkey Kong 64 and
Mhm.
how, in Donkey Kong Country, that game has very tight, fast expressive movement options with the roll and how you can roll through enemies and get a speed boost. You can roll off of ledges and jump out of your roll, and it just goes like so far in like maintaining flow and fun. And then in Donkey Kong 64, you don't have that at all. Like you can do the roll, it looks like a roll, but it's really no different from pressing the B button normally and doing a kick like as Donkey Kong normally does. And there's no like inertia, you know?
Yeah, there's never a moment in Donkey Kong 64 where you need to like, yeah, build up your momentum, or you're like, oh well, maybe if I jump up this way, I'll get up here. Like the
Mhm.
solution to every problem you face in Donkey Kong 64, like for the most part, you're almost like kind of just accessing your mental inventory of like, okay, do I need to shoot something with the gun here? Do I need to step on one of the platforms with this specific Kong? Like it's very much, do you have the solution for this puzzle? Do you have the right key on your key ring? Instead of anything where it's your actual skill of moving these monkeys around the level.
Yeah, exactly. It's like super contextual. And that is like the big difference because once I started just like really messing with the Mario 64 movement system, the amount of options that it provides you, whereas like instead of like, just shooting a thing to open up another thing or like interacting with the pad that has the Kong's face on it to like solve a puzzle or whatever. In Mario
Mhm.
64, like it's just get to the top of this thing and there's like 3 different paths that you can take. Like, I think Womp's Fortress to me is like the go-to example. Bob-omb
Yeah.
Battlefield is a good first level, but Womp's Fortress is where the like true genius of the game like really opens up, I think.
That level has, it has a full like linear Mario levels like worth of platforming if you go up like the actual take every pathway. But then
Yeah.
also if you know what you're doing, you can like get to the top in just 10 seconds from using just jumping off different angles and little side jumps and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's so special about that is like, I think people may be listening from their perspective versus ours who are very knowledgeable with the game and they'll think and they might get the impression like, oh yeah, these guys are speedrunners or whatever. They know everything. Like when they play the game, it may be effortless, but when I play the game, I'm bonking into ledges with the like sluggish controls and I'm spinning off into the bottomless pits that is just all over the game and it's very punishing and it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
But
Any of my audience that's watched my streams know that I am not a speedrunner. I am not actually that good at these games. So
oh, but yeah, the point though is that I feel for those people, and I don't want to seem like I definitely don't want to come across as elitist, but what I really want people to understand is like this goes back to like what you said about it feels like it was released yesterday. I'm like a picking on you for that because for me, I think when you go into the game with the expectations of it controlling like what you're used to, even if you go into it expecting Super Mario Odyssey or
mhm.
even Super Mario Sunshine, you are going to get punished by certain design choices that aren't, to the credit of people complaining about it, are not like specifically explained. Like a lot of the really not minor, but stuff that can be easily overlooked as far as like the real intricate maneuvers and like the way like the physics like interact and stuff.
Mhm.
For instance, like I was referring to earlier, that weird half circle turn where you want to turn directly backwards, but then Mario will do like a little 180-degree turn. And in precise situations, you end up falling off ledges for that. The
Mhm.
key to those situations is to not pull back on the analog stick right when you're landing on a ledge and turning around like you would instinctually, but landing on the ledge, stopping completely, letting your analog stick reset to 0 input in the center, and then moving, and then you can move in any direction that you want without that weird circle
Mm.
turn. And that specific momentum and inertia that you really have to respect, and then once you get that, it opens up the possibilities of what you can really do in the game. And once you start to realize these little things and then apply that to just any other like weird instance of platforming, you can approach the game in such a free and open way that it's just addicting. It's really addicting to just see all the different ways that you can outmaneuver the level design or get through it quickly or, trying out multiple different solutions to one particular problem. It's like super fascinating and really addictive to me personally, at least.
It's funny. So I knew that we were going to do this episode on Mario 64. And so I was like, I'm going to get some B roll for this episode. After I got the B roll, I wound up actually watching a little bit of your video
Oh, nice.
where you talked about a little bit about the momentum of Mario 64
Mhm.
and kind of the comparison between I think it was your girlfriend, how they would play the game and then how you would play the game knowing the momentum a bit better. And so even before I watched that video, I had gone to get my B-roll and I had a friend coming over that had never played Mario 64 before. And so
Oh,
just
no
out of
way.
curiosity, I wanted him to try out some of the levels and capture footage of him and see how he responded to it. And the difference in like just the assumptions that he had for how Mario would control and kind of how slippery and how slowly he would have to progress through certain levels. And then compared to what I was able to do, like immediately afterwards, if I would try the exact same star after he died, it was kind of mind blowing. But then he would ask me questions of like, wait, so how do you do the little like side jump that Mario does? And I would have to explain that to him because the game doesn't tell you a lot of the really intricate movement stuff until like later on. You might find like a random signpost in like Hazy Maze Cave that finally tells you what the long jump is.
I was just thinking
Um,
about that
yeah.
particular example. It's a good
Um,
one.
and that's like in terms of playing it for the first time, that probably is like a good way to dole out like just the little bits of information. Like we're only going to tell you this whenever you need it. But once you just unlock these tools in your arsenal, and there's that little bit of needing to get the game to click with you to make it feel, I guess, like it came out yesterday, to go back to that. But
Yeah.
once you kind of overcome that initial stepping stone and you kind of unlock like, oh, this is how movement works, just yeah, I can't think of many other like 3D platformers that compare with just how it feels, like just how good in general, and the amount of options just available to you.
Yeah. To me, it makes it like endlessly replayable. Like, and I'm not even saying that because I'm a speedrunner or of it. Like casual speedrunner, mostly 16 star and a little bit of 70. My 70 star time for anybody interested is right a little bit less than an hour. So not like crazy, but still like decent, I'd say. But, going back to that, like, expressive versus contextual aspect of it, it can always be fun to, like, go back to, like, childhood games and re-experience them and see, like, how you respond to certain challenges differently in a game like Donkey Kong 64.
Hmm.
But, like, in Mario, I always go back to that expression. That's the big thing to me. It's like there's skill expression, and so you can go back like you can play it as a kid and be a complete noob, but then if you stick with it or even just come back to it later when you've gotten practice in other games of just how games work and how you can respond to like certain how as an adult you make certain observations about like how stuff controls and all that, and you go back to Super Mario 64 and it's like you're playing a completely different game. Like there's just so much depth to it, and it just like amazes me.
As you said, it sounds like we're speedrunners whenever we talk about this stuff. Like, oh, there's so many ways you can approach this, and there's actually so much depth to this thing. And for a lot of games, I think it is the case that once you get into the speedrunning, like I feel like even the speedruns for Donkey Kong 64 probably start to get into like, oh, there actually is like some momentum thing you need to do to like that can get you up onto this area a lot earlier. And for the speedrun route, or the speedrun players, that kind of gives them a bit more complexity to the game. But for most games, that additional complexity is only going to be if you're like hardcore speedrunning and you're going to dedicate yourself to the like super minutia of like how you get Diddy Kong moving like just a little bit faster.
Yeah,
But for Mario 64, that kind of that depth I feel like is so much more accessible compared to any other platformer,
exactly.
because
Yeah.
yeah, that depth would be relegated to just the speedrunners for like Mario Sunshine, or Mario Galaxy if you're really trying to get into um, optimizing the game. But Mario 64, there's so many granular levels of it, can be as complex as you want it to be, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Also goes back to like that instance that you mentioned earlier with streamers. Like there was like that meta for a time where, like you said, these streamers were not Mario players. Like I think like as a really good example of that is Emiru. I don't know if you're familiar with Emiru. She's like a
Oh,
League
yes,
of
yes.
Legends
Yeah.
player. She's a League
Yeah.
of Legends player, and this was around the time where like big streamers like Mizkif, Mizkif is like a big Nintendo fan.
Yes, Mizkif was one of the big guys I was thinking of.
Yeah, so like for him it like kind of made sense. Like he grew up with Mario, but like
Mhm.
Emeru did not as far as I'm aware. Like she was a complete noob, complete novice, and he got her into playing the game. And she was out here speed running 16-star runs in like less than 30 minutes. Like
Yes.
and doing really good because like I think it goes back to what I was saying. Like you can apply just how you engage with games as an adult or as a more experienced player. There's kind of like an awareness that you can apply even if you're not a platforming expert. There is an intuition there where you can
Mhm.
do crazy stuff, and like the ceiling is just so open. And that, yeah, like my point being, along the lines that you brought up, like anybody can really do it. And that is what that's like the really important thing is that anybody can do it, because Nintendo as a whole, they often find ways to make games accessible but also enriched with a really high skill ceiling.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's another example which is totally different, and I'm just kind of studying it now because I'm working on a really long retrospective about the Paper Mario series. And that is the kind of game where like Nintendo's famous for this philosophy of like, when I did some research into like the development of the original game, and one of their big priorities was, we need to make this game playable and accessible for a first grade audience, but we also need to find ways for skilled and experienced players to like really dig into the game. And that was where action commands came in and the badge system came in. And the key
Mm.
is often providing freedom and expression in order to give those skilled players something to just keep them coming back like again and again. And Nintendo just does it so well. Like it's really amazing.
One of the things that I noticed about Nintendo kind of leaning into this, and it's one of my favorite kind of structures they've ever done. I love how Mario Odyssey is structured. The fact that you kind of get like this whirlwind tour of each of the worlds, and there's like the bit of openness. You can choose like how to get the small amount of moons you need to get your ship going to the next place. They have the story where you need to like chase down the rabbits in each world and fight those bosses and everything. And you get the whole chasing down Bowser thing. You get your grand finale on the moon. You get the credits roll. And that's all like super basic. Like any kid is going to be able to play that and have a fun time and get to save Peach from Bowser at the end of the game. Credits roll, amazing. And then there is at least three quarters more of the game that you can play after that, because the whole thing just
Yeah.
opens up. They double the amount of moons in every world, and they're like, okay, if you actually want to play the game, now you can play the game. And
Mhm.
there's some crazy like intense challenges that you can come across in like the end game kind of mode of that. But I love how they have that where kids are going to get feel like they get a full experience out of getting through all the opening stuff, and that feels almost like a full package unto itself. But then they just keep adding additional challenges and just putting them past the credits for anyone that wants to pursue those. I think it's a really cool way to structure their stuff.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's really funny that you mentioned that, because like, as discourse happens, like
Mhm.
people complain about stuff, and I think about how people at times, people have complained about Mario Odyssey and how, the collection aspects of the moons like doesn't feel as impactful as like other games where like was there like 900 moons or something like that, something
Yeah,
absurd.
yeah.
You can get them, a lot of them, like kind of super easily, or they're like more minor challenges kind of comparable to like the Korok seeds and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the
Mhm.
Kingdom. And people complain about that aspect, and it doesn't feel as rewarding to them. But I think, like, once you pair that with just moving around in unique ways, like, it makes those aspects, like, even more rewarding.
No, I actually I'm so happy you agree with that because I that's actually one of my favorite things about Odyssey is just how many moons there is, and that every little like if you do a little linear platforming section that was hidden behind a doorway, you get a moon or two if you can. Usually, each of those has like at least two because there's like the main
Yeah.
little goal of the side area, and then there's like a secret one in that side area. I really like that every little thing you do is giving you a tiny bit of progression because like by the end of the game it's like okay, well now you need 100 more moons to unlock the super extra difficult challenge on the dark side of the moon or like darker side of the moon. People can say this would be more impactful if it was just 10 really hard to get moons that you had to get for this, but I kind of like the just I know any little thing I'm doing while exploring these worlds and moving around is slowly getting me towards that goal. And maybe that's just like scratching in an ADHD like part of my brain, like something a little
Mhm.
bit better. But I really like how that is structured as well.
Yeah, I think there's also an element of, implicit versus or not implicit, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which
Hmm.
is another thing in regards to Nintendo games that I think is can be kind of a barrier for some people. There's people that especially like, I think the go-to example is for like RPGs where RPGs like stat-based progression is for like the extrinsically motivated player. When you see the numbers go up and it's satisfying for you in that regard. And in that case, when you view that kind of like player psychology with respect to what we're talking about, it may not be as impactful because tangibly you see like I'm just getting these for nothing and that feels weird to me. But I think like from an intrinsic perspective, there's just so much more value there. And that like it's I think I may be getting a little too meta with it. Like there's such a deep rabbit hole when it comes to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, but
Yeah.
that's like part of when I learned to think of in the mindset of an intrinsically motivated player, that just opened up the enjoyability of for so many games like this, and I think goes back to, like, that movement aspect, that core of Mario that can carry me through any situation. I don't need, like, to feel, like, rewarded with, with moons or moons that feel, like, super valuable. Like, you know what
Yeah,
I'm
because
saying?
yeah, to me, like anytime I get like if I uncover like a secret room in Mario Odyssey and it's one of those like little linear platforming challenges, like the platforming challenge is itself the reward to me because I just love Nintendo platformers and
Mhm.
any level they make, it's like, oh, I want to check this out. And so giving me the moon on top of that was always just the cherry on top. It was just the nice little kind of confirmation, like, yes, we wanted you to find this, but it's not the reward. So yeah, I guess if you're right. If you're doing it just for your moon number to go up, it might not be as satisfying. But if
Yeah.
it's more so, I want to experience every platforming challenge this game has, and the number going up is just a nice little bonus to kind of almost show just how many of those challenges I've done. Like that feels a lot better. So
Yeah, I
yeah, it's
agree
interesting
completely.
how that like difference in perspective kind of flips it around.
Yeah. I mean, I would encourage anybody who's like kind of on the fence of like it's hard. Like I kind of try to think I hate talking about the Galaxy games because people get mad at me. People get really mad at me when
They
I
they start
talk about
discourse. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but like Galaxy to me feels almost like the antithesis to like what I'm really wanting. And
Hmm.
maybe 3D World also to a lesser extent, but it's like that course clear kinda thing, that
Hmm.
course clear aspect where, like, it's very controlled, it's very contained, and to Galaxy's credit, like, those levels are exceedingly well designed, like, and they're super fun,
Mhm.
like, at least on a first playthrough, like, for sure. But when I go back to them, there's something missing, and it's in the, like, it's in the core of it.
I really enjoy those games, but I find I do enjoy them in a different way than I do Mario
Yeah.
64 or Mario Odyssey. Where I feel they're a lot more similar to the straightforward, almost new Super Mario Bros. More linear platforming challenges, and
Mhm.
I very much enjoy those. But it's almost kind of going back to that context sensitive thing. Like it's technically
Yes.
more moving Mario than like solving puzzles and everything, but there's not exactly going to be, again, if there is any like weird momentum solutions or different solutions to a room or something, that's usually just because you're getting to like the heavy duty speed running tricks. It's not
Mhm.
expected for you to have a different experience going through this level every time.
I think the depth of the fundamentals is just not the same, and
Hmm.
that is what really does it for me. Like, I was thinking about this today actually because I was playing a demo for an upcoming indie game. It's called The Big Catch. Have you heard of that game at all?
Oh, I've heard of it, and but I haven't checked out the demo yet.
I was really surprised they even put out a demo. They haven't been super communicative. They're really just working and trying to get the game finished. But
They're
they
in
just
Silk Song mode.
yeah, yeah, but like they just dropped this toy box demo. It's called the Tackle Box. And I
Oh,
th-
nice.
yeah, it's like it's surprisingly extensive. Like I played it for an hour and I needed to pry myself away from it because I was like, "Is this feels like a full game? Like, you guys are crazy for this." I think what's amazing about it is the confidence to just put out the demo with all that content. To me, shows in like how they are anticipating people are going to engage with their game, because the big catch is fundamentally everything about Mario 64 that I love. And there's no gating of abilities, at least in this demo. I don't know how they're going to treat it in the full game. Like, you get all of your abilities at the start. There's a tiny little tutorial area that's like teaching you like how to use like the core movement mechanics and all that. And then it just lets you free roam. And the structure of the game, I'm pretty sure this is going to be in the final game. The structure is is free roam, and you have these platforming gauntlets scattered throughout this like vast like desert, and you use these think like when you're playing Breath of the Wild and you have those I don't know what they are. They're like seal things that drag you across the desert. You're like shield
Oh,
surfing.
yeah, yeah, those guys, yeah.
Yeah, they have that to get you around to these platforming gauntlets. You know what it is? It's Bowser's Fury. It's
I was just gonna
literally
say this sounds a
yeah.
lot like Bowser's Fury, yeah.
Yes, it's structured just like Bowser's Fury, and you have like Plessy ferrying you between these platforming gauntlets.
I'm really interested how that seems to be catching on because Bowser's Fury did that, and apparently I was just reading like yesterday. That's how the new Shadow content in the Sonic X Shadow Generations thing they're doing.
Oh,
Um,
no way. Are you serious? I did not know
yeah,
that.
I didn't watch a whole lot of the footage, but I saw some people freaking out because because they were kind of making fun of that like Sonic's hub world is just it's like a 2D side scrolling, just like go over to the different doors.
Oh, yeah.
But like Shadows is like a whole like yeah, like kind of Bowser's Fury setup of like that white void, but then there's like different pieces from all the different levels like popping in, and those make up little
Oh.
platforming sections to get you into the actual levels.
Oh, that's so
Um,
interesting. I had no idea that they were approaching it that way. I really need to look into that.
Yeah, so it seems like that, like these big, almost like open world hub worlds with like scattered obstacle courses, like kind of connecting them.
Mhm.
That's really cool how that's catching on.
Yeah, that's like that was I'm actually potentially working on something that's gonna be covering this in more detail. I
Oh,
am
nice.
working on like this really long retrospective, but to break the immersion for the viewers for a second, we were actually going to record this last week, and we were running into technical issues, which and before that I was obviously like really excited to have the conversation. But we ended up postponing, and in that time that was when I started playing the Big Catch demo, and it was just like, "Oh my god, like, this game is exactly what I've been looking for." That, like, following Super Mario 64, like, following my experience going, like, in depth with the game, I think that with this game and also a few others, I feel like we're moving into a new era for 3D platformers. Another example that I wanna bring up is Pseudo Regalia. Did you play that last year?
I haven't played that, but it's another one that I've only heard good things about.
Dude, you gotta check that out. It's literally like Mario 64 movement in a Metroidvania, in a 3D Metroidvania. It's actually
Oh,
crazy. I had somebody message me and they were like, because I was like on the fence about it too. It didn't jump out at me immediately, but somebody messaged me and they were like, dude, I know how much you love Mario 64. Promise me you'll try this game. And I was like, okay, you understand me, so I'm gonna do this. And I hopped in and I was like, oh my god, you're so right about this. And it hits at that freedom in skill expression in that core movement system. And I think that is gonna be the future of platforming in 3D for the next few years. Primarily because there's not a lot of AAA studios that are interested in taking on not only just releasing like a new 3D platformer, but like really like pushing the genre forward as far as like appealing to like players outside of like those that are like inherently nostalgic about the past.
mhm, yeah.
And like Nintendo and maybe to a lesser extent Sonic, they are the ones setting the tone for like what is going to happen in the future. And I think Bowser's Fury just set it so well with this sandbox structure that indie games can replicate so well because there was kind of a platformer like resurgence when Super Mario Odyssey came out in the likes of Ukulele and A Hat in Time,
Mhm. Yeah.
but those games didn't really hit me in the same way, and it's like, especially with Ukulele, that is, to me, essentially the sequel to Banjo-Tooie, and it
Mhm.
relies on a lot of the same contextual interactions. But
Mhm, yeah.
yeah, to make a game, like, in the modern era that compares favorably to, like, those that are setting the tone right now, like, you can't expect indie developers to make a Super Mario Odyssey, but they can make a
Mhm.
Bowser's Fury, and that is what I think is happening right now with, like, The Big Catch and Pseudo Regalia, and it's, like, made me really, really excited to see, like, what is coming along those same lines.
Yeah, it feels like we had that kind of era of the same way that there was a big era for like 2D platformers and 2D Metroidvanias. We had that era of, oh, isn't it nice to have some 3D platformers back? And there was the couple indie companies like, yeah, Playtonic
Mhm.
and with Ukulele and then A Hat in Time. But those were kind of, I wouldn't say they're entirely focused on nostalgia, but that was like a big, big kind of reason for their existence was people
Yeah.
trying to get back that like banjo-kazooie magic. And I feel like now, kind of coming along the same time as we're really getting into everyone's making like PS1 graphic styled games now.
Yeah.
We're kind of entering an era where people are figuring out, well, okay, I really liked these 3D platformers in the past, but either taking aspects from other genres and adding on to them to do something new, or just seeing what they can do with 3D platformers in general to, yeah, be something new and crazy instead of just being, oh, this is what our Banjo Kazooie 3 would have looked like, but with legally distinct characters.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what you need to, like, get people interested. I don't wanna say to get normies interested, but people that aren't like, the as far as, like, Ukulele and Hat in Time, to a lesser extent, I think A Hat in Time is actually, like maybe it's just from my perspective, but I feel like it doesn't fall as hard into the nostalgia trap, I guess,
No,
as much as ukulele.
from what I remember of Hat in Time, it's definitely doing its own thing kind of structure-wise, and it was a little
Mhm.
bit more story focused. So I would say Hat in Time definitely had a bit more of its own identity.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I still do think that maybe, I don't know, maybe it couldn't have done enough to really, like, cause more of a resurgence of, like, even more developers following up on it, because it's not a AAA project. It might just be an inherent limitation of, like, the scope of the project. I guess just going back to, like, I'm thinking, like, now there's potentially more of a future in, this new style that is, like, just focusing on fundamentals mostly.
Having a really solid core game feel, and
Mhm.
yeah, giving people the opportunities to like use that to do cool stuff.
Yeah.
So actually, talking about the future, we haven't heard anything from the Mario devs in a while, or the 3D Mario devs in a
Yeah.
while.
What is
Um,
up with that?
I if I were a betting man, or at least what I'm hoping for, is that whatever the next Mario game is, I'm hoping that's like a Switch 2 launch title,
Oh, for
or
sure.
yeah, like that's got to be it after just it's been 7 years since Odyssey, which is crazy
Mhm.
to think about. I've
Yeah.
still have very vivid memories of like waiting up until midnight for that game to activate.
Yeah, it freaking
Um
went by in a flash, man.
and so they technically like they did Bowser's Fury in between, but other than that, like we don't know what this next project's going to be. So I guess my question would be, what do you hope they focus on, or what do you think? Like, obviously, you're a big fan of the Mario 64 style and all the movement possibilities. So is there anything in that arena you think they should expand on, or something new they should do, or something other games have done that you think that Mario should incorporate, since they're kind of one of the last AAA like platformers standing?
That's a tough question for me, honestly, because, in spite of, like, how rigid my beliefs as far as, like, what I really love about Mario may come across in like this conversation, I'm more of like the wait and see kind of person. Like, I'm just like really open to the possibilities of like what they want to try. Um
Oh, you're giving the me answer. I love it.
well, I guess what I will say is, like, it is a very strange point because with Super Mario Odyssey being the way it is, very ambitious, very open, but also like in this open zone format rather than a full open world. And then following that up with Bowser's Fury, which is, the whole zone is probably like a little bit bigger than some of Odyssey's biggest individual levels. And so it's really hard to say like what they will potentially do with the next game, or like what I mean, as far as what I really want to see. Even if it doesn't work out super well, I would definitely be interested in seeing them just go crazy all out with the persistent open world vibe that they set forth with Bowser's Fury, and just giving it the same scale and resources and ambition that Super Mario Odyssey received. That
Mhm.
seems like the go-to kind of thing for them. And it almost feels like it's hard to say that how many options they have, which sounds crazy because it's Nintendo. They really can do anything. But as far as if they want to appeal to expectation, the logical step for me is to go in that direction that I just described. And obviously, like, I think it would be really, really fun and really interesting, especially as long as they continue to focus on the core movement fundamentals. Like, I would be super impressed with that. But yeah, I don't know. I really haven't given it that much thought because I like to just see what Nintendo wants to give me, and the most often that results in like me being surprised by something and learning to love something that I didn't know was going to appeal to me.
Yeah, that's I said that was a very me answer, because I that's where I find myself as a Zelda fan a lot, because
Oh,
there's so
yeah.
much discussion, because they've said that Tears of the Kingdom is going to be their last game, Well, they've both said Tears of the Kingdom is kind of the last game in that the specific Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom style, but then they've also said that the more open and kind of more open-ended puzzles and multitude of solutions to puzzles that they've been focusing on these last two games, that they want to keep expanding on that. So they've said a few kind of different things, but it sounds like whatever they do next with Zelda is going to be pretty new again. And so anytime
Interesting.
someone asks me, uh, well, like, what do you want them to do? That's always kind of my answer. Is it's like if forced, I could say like a couple specific things, like, oh, it'd be nice if they brought back the hook shot or something like that. But in general, I'm really like, I trust them to whatever their creative like ambitions are going toward, or whatever they feel like doing after spending so much time on the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom kind of setup.
Hmm.
Um, we're just they're devs that I trust wherever they want to take the franchise. And it was even like, I'm sure they can come up with stuff that I can't even come up with, because like you're saying, for Mario, that would be really cool to have a fully open world like platforming environment. And I feel like it would be a huge pain to actually like figure out how to balance that and make that like all connect together seamlessly.
Hmm.
But if there's anyone that could figure out how to do that and how to make that all gel together perfectly, like, it's probably the 3D Mario devs are going to be the ones to figure that out.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was actually the same way with Tears of the Kingdom, where going into that, I was like, there is no way this can impress me as much as Breath of the Wild did the first time that I played that. Like, there's just no way they can top that. But they somehow found like just the perfect combo that, to me, it felt like the perfect sequel for what I wanted from a sequel to Breath of the Wild.
Hmm.
But if you'd asked me beforehand, like how to do that, I would not have been able to tell you anything.
Yeah, I mean, like, sometimes it just takes an idea that nobody can anticipate. And, there's a whole content creator industry of like making predictions based on like past behaviors of examining like trends and stuff like that. But with Nintendo, like, you can make predictions, but there's a good chance that they're gonna come back with something that nobody was anticipating. And with Tears of the
Yeah.
Kingdom, it's like, oh yeah, Fujibayashi, like, he likes cars, so he wants to just put cars and vehicles in Zelda, and look how crazy well that worked. And who was anticipating that? Like, I certainly wasn't.
Yeah, no one was looking at like that first trailer for the sequel of Breath of the Wild 2 is now in development and being like, yeah, they're probably going to put banjo-kazooie nuts and bolts into this. That seems like the obvious move.
Yeah, right? Oh, man. That that whole thing has definitely made me more curious about nuts and bolts on its own, like.
I've been a nuts and bolts defender for a long time. One of my earlier game design videos was actually on just that. This is actually a really cool game. It just gets a bad rap because it kind of took the place, or people feel like it took the place of a proper Banjo Kazooie 3.
Yeah.
But I always would say that like the actual mechanics on their own, if it was in a different series, like people would love this. And I
Mhm.
I got a bit proven right with how well received that
Yeah,
was
true.
whenever Zelda did it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hoping that you made a snarky tweet after that, just.
I was a little bit pleased about that.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that in gaming as a whole right now, I don't know if maybe it's just me getting older and my outlook changing, but like, we're at a point where like change, and really change that you cannot anticipate, is super important. Like, we're at a
Mhm.
point where like live service is the thing that everybody just wants to like go away, like these immortal games. Like, there's a I mean, no, I shouldn't say everybody, because there's a lot of people that love to play these endless games.
Mhm.
And also with like budgets like getting out of control and development cycles taking like 5 to 6 years, it's really hard for these companies to take a risk and do something like really innovative. And we're reaching a point where like that is gonna have to change. Like, it's like the safe route, like the tried and true safe route of just releasing like sequels to stuff and like banking on these money printers like Fortnite and stuff like that. It's not gonna last forever, I think. And
Yeah,
so
no, it definitely feels like there's some kind of creative reset is like just around the corner. Because you can almost like feel it. Like anytime a game like kind of does break through and really get people's attention, that everyone like there's kind of the vibe of like, oh, finally some good food. Like
yes.
even with stuff like Baldur's Gate 3 and just everyone being like, oh my God, like a good deep RPG, like with a budget. Like we haven't had one of these in so long or whenever like Balatro,
Hmm. Helldivers.
Helldivers, just yeah, whenever something like actually does pop and feel like new or is a fresh take on something that we haven't seen in a while, like you can almost feel people being like, "Oh, this is yes, it's good to have one of these again."
Yeah, it's like I think, you know, we kind of need to look at that and realize that like it's time to like embrace change. And that's why I really liked your answer of like how we align in the fact that I just want to wait and see and be surprised, and if it doesn't immediately appeal to me, like whatever they want to do with Mario, like come at it with an open mind and give it a shot. And
Yeah. Cuz
yeah.
if they do decide like maybe the next Mario will wind up being super contextual and they'll lean more into that kind of like adventure or like puzzle solving element. And if that's the case, I guess I just hope that they have some other like unique perspective on that they at least are innovating in some kind of way. Like if it winds up being what people always put in the fake direct leaks like Mario Galaxy 3, like I hope that it's not just that it's not just a nostalgia retread and
Oh
instead
yeah.
they're like, no, we have something new we can do with this.
Yeah, Nintendo is the kind of company where like they're always like so forward thinking and like always willing to like take a risk or do something weird that maybe people weren't asking for.
Mhm.
And that makes them that can make them an easy target for games that end up having a like bad reputation for a while. Like you said with like Banjo and like I think of like some Star Fox games like Star Fox Adventures, like it's not like Star
Mhm.
Fox, so
Yeah.
it's not good. But when you're like always looking ahead, always looking forward and trying to innovate, it's not always going to be like perfect. Like it's not always going to like please everyone. And sometimes you need to make a game that is not amazing to get to an amazing one. And at this point, I'm open to whatever they want to do.
And yeah, that idea of you need to have made something like less impressive before you finally like get to that perfect 10 out of 10 game. Something I really liked about Mario Odyssey was that it did feel like kind of the best of both worlds of a lot of Super Mario 64, but then a lot of the more linear 3D games like 3D World and the Galaxies with those specific like kind of offshoot like platforming challenges that you'd come
Right.
across all the time in Odyssey or whenever you'd like during the story where it's a bit more linear of a goal to get to one of those rabbit bosses.
Hmm.
Um, they'd kind of weave back in and forth between those two styles. And yeah, it felt like a celebration of all of 3D Mario in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that.
And I don't know if they could have like put all that together if like Odyssey was came out right after Sunshine as like a complete course correction from that rather
True.
than figuring out like the Galaxy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Things take time, and it's not the end of the world if one game comes out and it's not your favorite. Is the moral of the story, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No. something something a lot of gamers need to learn is just it's okay to chill every now and then.
Yeah.
It is really nice that we are at a point where if Nintendo takes one of their big series in like a different direction from what we want, there's likely at least two or three indie developers that are in your mindset and also agree with that and are going to say,
Oh
well,
yeah.
I'm going to make a platformer in the other direction.
I was
Like
literally about to say that.
my big thing for like the Zelda debates on whether they should make like a 3D Zelda that's closer to the Ocarina of Time and like Twilight Princess style, like go back to the more traditional 3D Zelda compared to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. My response is always let Nintendo do what they want to do with Zelda, keep innovating, do something bigger and better than Tears of the Kingdom, whatever they want to do in this more open direction that they keep saying they really like, that they've been taking the Zelda puzzle design in. But I really hope that there's at least a couple indie developers that are working on basically their own versions of Ocarina of Time or
Hmm.
something that's way closer to that. Twilight Princess, these are the set dungeons, there's a set item in every dungeon, and just that kind of classic Zelda rhythm that Nintendo themselves have gone away from. But that doesn't mean that indie developers can't take the best aspects of that design and do something themselves with it.
Yeah, I think as a fan of those kind of games that Nintendo may not be supplying right now, what is really important is to keep your eyes open for projects, especially that are going on Kickstarter. And you have to put your money where your mouth is and support projects like these, and they will be
Hmm.
popping up. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but at least right now there's a ton of 2D top-down Zelda-like games in development. It's actually crazy. I'll shout out
Yep.
one that I featured in my last video, Maple Forest by Natsukaze. He's going up on Kickstarter very soon. Keep an eye out for that. Like, I've had conversations with him, like, about his, like, process moving forward, and I'm really, really excited for that in particular. And there's even more. I mean, another one just popped up just, like, a few days, or not a few days, a few weeks ago. It's called Castaway. It looks very, Link's Awakening inspired. Um, that is, like, it's probably gonna fit that niche of like, this game is being like I think it's like being solo developed, and it's gonna be tight in scope, and it's gonna scratch that itch that people have been waiting for. And I think the same thing is going to happen with 3D. Like, it's only a matter of time. If Nintendo continues to not release like new games in that style, like there's going to be a hole in the market, and it's like eventually like some indie developers are going to capitalize on it. And so yeah, like I said, you just got to keep your eyes open and look out for these projects.
One of the only good things about Twitter these days is I love the amount of just random indie projects because there's so many of those. I don't know if they're like engagement bait like originally, but it's like pitch your indie game in like one
Oh yeah, I've
sentence,
seen
and then
those.
just it keeps putting like into my feed just everyone pitching their indie game, and it's always like, oh, that sounds cool, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Um, like there's one Windswept that I just
Oh
saw that's like
dude, that game.
literally like just let's bring Donkey Kong Country back, but with like pixel graphics. That the game looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought about covering that in my last video, but it looks so amazing that I have no worries about it. And I am confident that once that game releases, it's gonna blow up and people are
Yeah.
gonna be like, "Oh my god, this game is amazing." So
Yeah,
I'm
I
super
hope
excited
it
for
gets
that.
like a Hollow Knight level reception just from everything I've seen of it. Yeah, just a lot of indie devs doing really, really cool stuff.
And if I don't get what I want with the Mario, I'll be playing the big catch, so I'll be good.
There we go. I guess actually I got one more Mario 64 question just to
Sure.
bring it back around. What's your favorite level in that entire game?
Ooh, oh man. That is a good question.
I've been
Hmm.
thinking about it a bunch just for myself because there's some levels in that game just replaying it for the B-roll where I'm like, I don't think about this level as much. Like the one with the submarine and like Wet Dry World.
Wet Dry World is actually kind of a good show. I feel like that's kind of underrated. There's a few different like styles of level in Mario 64. Man, there's like so many different angles with that game that I kind of wish I talked about it more, but like I think the two big ones are like what we kind of talked about was like the obstacle course of like random amalgamations of stuff. And there's
Hmm.
also another thing, which is for me, I look at it as there's like, you see this with the mountain levels the most, where there's like this big point of interest that you're kind of climbing up. And
Hmm.
so they almost feel like two different styles of level in that regard. And so I kind of want to pick two. And I think Wet Dry World is a particularly interesting one for me because you have all these like different things to interact with, but you don't have like the lava or a bottomless pit to fall in that is really
Hmm.
like informing your way of like interacting with stuff. And so you can really experiment and do some crazy stuff to like get up to ledges without activating the switch and stuff like that. In the 70 star speedrun, that is a very fun level to play. So I think for that particular style of level, Wet Dry World is a very good choice. For the more point of interest centerpiece kind of thing, I would say Cool Cool Mountain. Like
Oh yeah.
the subversion of like instead of climbing up a mountain, sliding down it is so fun, and I love playing that all the time. Cool Cool Mountain,
Yeah.
great level.
I just the penguin races inside has got a little kind of first tease of having mini games or little side objectives in these worlds
Yeah.
that Banjo-Kazooie would like really lean into later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good
Um
stuff.
yeah. I'm also I can't go without mentioning Lethal Lava Land might be one of my favorite levels in like any
Ooh.
video game.
Oh
Just
wow, that's surprising.
there's something about the aesthetic of lava levels that I really like,
Uh-huh.
but there's just the way they treat the lava where it's really exciting to try and just, oh, well, I'm going to long jump from this platform to another. And if you screw it up, you're not going to immediately die. Like you kind of have the option to hop
Yeah.
off or like get hurt off the lava and then land on something else. But it's not guaranteed because Mario like controls really awkwardly when he's grabbing his ass because he's
Yeah.
on fire. So there's something that just like the energy of that level, I've always really liked.
That's a really good point.
Anytime I replay it, I find that like that's the world that I always get like all 6 stars, like just in a row, like when I do it.
Uh-huh.
Like there's no, oh, I'll come back to it. It's just, no, I love this level. I love going through it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like when you're trying to play that level as quickly as possible, you are jumping into that lava all the time. And it is really fun to just shoot out into the sky and like land on something. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good choice.
Um, and we talked about Womp's Fortress a bit. I find early levels in games don't usually get enough credit because usually they're a bit simpler and they're still teaching you stuff. But people could talk for hours about like just all the different ways you can scale that fortress
Yeah.
and just all the options. I think like it and like Dodongo's Cavern and like Ocarina of Time are just crazily well done 3D spaces that are like half tutorial, just kind of sum up their games so early.
Hmm.
And I think stuff like that doesn't get enough credit just because it's the tutorial and people are usually more drawn to like the tougher later levels or the more bombastic stuff that happens.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I kind of wish I talked about this earlier, but one thing that I love about levels like that, more specifically, going back to that like point of interest kind of thing, is when you have a fortress level like that, like Womp's Fortress, or a mountain level, it kind of mitigates a lot of the issues I think that people seem to have with the camera, because you have this point of interest that you can swivel the camera around. And if you are trying to swivel it into a wall, like when the game is trying to establish this camera's a new thing that is like you're trying to get people to understand it by making it a real character and showing
Yes.
how it moves, like that kind of level structure, like if you're doing that, like then you're gonna run into problems, but the level is designed in a way and that you never really have to do that. Ah, dude,
You've
I
got
feel
the
like it's
option to like move
misunderstood.
it so you can like learn how to control the camera a bit, but the
Hmm.
camera's never going to like get into a really really bad spot in the levels like that.
Yeah, TikTok clock is kind of like the one where that probably gives people the most trouble, and that's kind of like an inverted like instance of that, where like instead of having the camera on the outside where it feels most natural, if you keep the camera on the inside, then it's going to pan with you as you like almost side scroll through the level, and it's probably not the most comfortable way to move around, but if you see it that way, then it's like it starts to make more sense of like how this camera is actually not as bad as like people may assume it to be.
It was actually funny whenever I was getting the B-roll with my friend, he asked me like, "Why is the camera like an actual dude?" And I had to explain like, "Well, this was the first one. They had to teach people like how 3D cameras worked and just
Yeah.
giving that a character like added to that a lot." And he was actually super impressed cuz the room that has the full mirror on the wall that has it's not Cool
Ooh,
Mountain. It's
Snowman's Land, I think?
Yeah, Snowman's Land,
Yeah.
the like mirrored room just before it. He was super impressed that they like would show the camera guy actually behind Mario, and he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's cute." Yeah, it was a really smart way to kind of teach people just that whole idea and concept of like, okay, with the camera's not just automatic like every 2D game was anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like, little things like that, like seeing Lakitu in the mirror is just another one of those things that Nintendo does that some other developers maybe not value as highly, and it
Mhm.
adds to, like, the whimsical nature, but also, like, just that game feel. Like, even if it's from a visual perspective, like, it adds to that game feel that, like, makes those games age so well and, like, feel so timeless, and it's awesome.
And that not to get spicy just at the end, but the discourse about which aged worse, Mario 64 or Sonic Adventure. Part of my reaction to that was just like, well, I think Mario gets a bunch of bonus points for like inventing this or like figuring this out a few years before like Sonic tried.
Yeah. I just like
Yeah,
I don't even know, man. I just have so many problems with that question because I don't even think like Sonic Adventure has aged particularly bad either. I think like
Yeah, no, I am to be clear to any Sonic fans in the comments, I used to have a reputation for making fun of 3D Sonic a lot.
oh yeah.
I'm so much chiller on that front now. Like I like the Sonic games a whole lot more than I used to. Just becoming more mellow over the years.
I mean,
Um
yeah, like you like for your videos, at least when I started watching you, which was a long time
mhm.
ago. I don't know if you had any idea about that, but like it was just a different time and like the benefit of being around this space for so long is that your opinions and your outlook towards stuff like that can just kind of tone down and mature a
Yeah.
little bit. And like, yeah, I totally understand. Like at that time, I didn't have a platform, but I was shitting on Sonic too.
Oh yeah. It was just a different time, and yeah,
Yeah.
we definitely mellowed out in my old age.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that.
Definitely not trying to bash Sonic Adventure by by bringing that up, but more so just that I always get a little bit defensive. I feel like Mario 64, like almost like the Beatles, with like, guys, it was so early. Like even
Yeah.
I don't even have any complaints like really about it having aged, or like it's still 100% hits for me. But any like of the complaints that I hear, I'm always like, but guys, it was 1996. Come on.
Yeah, I feel that so hard. Literally in my Twitter bio, I have will throw hands for Super Mario 64. I'm like certified the biggest like defender, and it actually hurts me a little when people like just discount it completely. And it's like it doesn't actually hurt my feelings, but it's like,
Yeah.
oh man, I wish you could just understand it like or
I wish
feel
you
the
could
same
see
way
this
that I
game
do.
through my eyes.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh man, it's so cringe, but also I feel so strongly about it.
So think that's just about gonna wrap us up for today on Mario 64. Is there any kind of closing thoughts on the game you wanted to give out, or anything we didn't get to address about it?
Nah, I think that's good. I mean, it's like it's a game that I could literally just talk about for hours, and it's like there's so many like rabbit holes to go down that like if you've listened to this entire thing, you can tell by us talking about the design on such a broad level and not even like getting super specific most of the time. And then realizing at the end of the conversation, oh crap, I didn't even mention how the camera is actually like really like interesting and important. And it's like, oh, it's
Yeah,
it
there
makes it
there
hard to
was
talk
an
about, honestly.
infinite amount of angles we kind
Yeah.
of could have taken on this game.
I'm happy with what we did talk about for sure.
So, if people wanted to find you, where would be the best place to look you up?
Yeah, so check me out on YouTube, Wizawhat, or Twitter at Wizawhat. I've got stuff coming soon. I mainly focus on Nintendo and indie games. I do a lot of huge retrospectives that take a lot of research and a lot of time to make, but I also try to fit in like shorter videos, like kind of highlighting certain indie games that like I think really like stand out. And I've got a few things I'm working on right now. I'm working on a massive Paper Mario retrospective. I played all the games, and that is going to be coming soon. I really want to just break open the discourse on that. I'm going crazy with it. Y'all are not ready. But I
Ooh.
might try to get up another video before that, and following this discussion and following like what I've been playing the last few days, I think I know what I'm after. And so you might be able to expect something along those lines of platforming ideology coming soon on my YouTube channel. And that's pretty much it.
Very, very nice. To everyone watching, I've been Josh Busker. You can find me, Josh Busker, anywhere on the internet. I've got music, I've got videos, I've got a whole variety of stuff. So thank you for watching this episode of Your Fave Game, and I'll see you all next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.